What's up, guys? Neil Orfield here, and I'm going to show you how I will be setting up my fantasy cruncher for tonight's single game slate between the Packers and the Titans. While you're coming in, if you could hit that thumbs up button on this video, I would appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. All right, I'm going to start here by switching up my columns to make sure I can see what I want to see in the middle of the screen. I have a quick view saved just so I can see ownership projections, my exposure, my projection, et cetera, in the middle of the screen. Those are the columns that I have found to be the most relevant. I should note I will be setting up for the largest field GPP on FanDuel. Some of the steps I'll be taking here I would not be taking if I were playing a really small field GPP or a cash game, things like that where you don't need to get as off the board. But for this, I will be setting up for the largest field GPP on FanDuel. Now I'm going to go into the MVP tab here, and I've already looked at the Stokastic single game top plays tool, and I see that there is nobody that we have in our sims. We have nobody in the optimal lineup in the captain spot more than 15% of the time. That does say captain. Let me just double check here. Yep, this is for FanDuel. So this for in the MVP spot is what this means, more than 20% of the time. So I'm going to set a hard cap on players in the MVP spot at 20%. So I'm going to go to this exposure column, set a cap at 20% for all players in the MVP spot. Next, I'm going to go into advanced options, and I'll be working in two tabs here, the general tab and the groups tab. In the general tab, unique players per lineup, I'm going to leave at 1. I'm making 150 lineups. So if I have lineups that are one player apart from each other, I'm okay with that. If you're making 20 or fewer lineups, I would probably recommend changing this to 2 unique players per lineup, just for the purpose of diversifying your portfolio. Salary cap, I'm not going to set a minimum. I am going to set a maximum just for the purpose of avoiding the most duplicated lineups. Typically, those are lineups that use the full salary or close to it. So I'm going to put a salary cap in here just to avoid some of those lineups. I'm going to leave $1,500 on the table so that if I am lucky enough to win, I'm going to win big money instead of splitting it among, 1,000, 2,000 people. Offensive players versus defense. Default is set to max of 2 players. I'm going to allow for up to 4 players against the opposing defense. We just saw this win a couple weeks ago with the Browns Bengals. The Browns had 4 players, and the Bengals defense was the only player represented in the optimal lineup from the Bengals. So it can win. I'm going to allow it. I'm not trying to force it in there, but it is just a lineup type that I am allowing in my builds. Exposure cap, I already set a cap on the MVP spot. I'm not going to set a cap in the flex. If I get to a good number of a certain player, I'm generally okay with that. If they project well enough, and if I'm not, if I think that I'm getting to more of a player than I want, I can just adjust elsewhere, but I'm going to leave that at 100%. Randomness, I'm going to use 50% randomness. I am using normal distribution randomness, which comes with Fantasy Cruncher Pro. If you have classic Fantasy Cruncher, I would maybe recommend using 30 or 40% randomness. Also, it's generally a personal preference. If you want more control over your lineups, use lower randomness. It's easier to control your lineups if you do use lower randomness. It also does slow down the program. If you use lower randomness, generally using more randomness speeds up the program. So I like to use 50%. I don't mind leaving a good amount to chance. That's the name of the game with DFS. Anyway, we control what we can control, but generally, I don't mind having some randomness here. Minimum projection included in calculation. Default is set to 3. I'm going to leave that at 3. If a player projects for fewer than 3 fantasy points and I want them to be in my player pool, I will just manually adjust their projection to make sure that it is 3 or greater. But for here, just going to leave that at 3. Thumbs up, thumbs down adjustments. 8% is generally a good number there. That just means if you give a thumbs up or a thumbs down on a player, it's going to boost or negatively boost their projection by 8%. Players from each team max, default is set to 4. I'm going to leave that at 4. That means I could have 4 players from one team against just 1 player from the other team. All right, now most of the work I do is also going to be in the groups tab. Guys, we have a great offer for new users only. You can get full access to everything Stokastic has to offer for NFL for 3 days free. Projections, ownership, 1v1 tools, lineup generator, top stacks tool, all free. 0 risk. Sign up now. The link is in the description of this video. Note that Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on and is not included in this offer. Generally, the groups that I care the most about, the ones that I find to be mandatory, are related to quarterbacks who are non-rushing quarterbacks. So generally, you kind of need to build in some correlations for those types of quarterbacks. So I'm going to start a group here. Rodgers in the MVP spot. And find Aaron Rodgers at MVP, make him my key player. And then in my secondary group, I'm just going to add all of his pass catchers in the flex. So Randall Cobb, Sammy Watkins, and Lazard. And I'm just adding any pass catcher with a projection. I'm going to include the running backs who are both fairly involved in the passing game. All right. So now for this group, I'm going to say if I have Aaron Rodgers in the MVP spot, so that's if any key player are used, then use at least one player from this group. I think I'm just going to leave it at one. If I were playing, again, 20 or fewer lineups, maybe 40 or fewer lineups, I would probably just change this to 2 and call it a day, require multiple pass catchers, because generally that is the most likely outcome. If Aaron Rodgers puts off enough fantasy points to be the optimal MVP, and he's not outscored by one of his pass catchers, that probably means that he has thrown multiple touchdowns, thrown for many yards, and he has spread the ball around. Because if he's throwing it to too much to one player, well, that player's outscoring him every time he throws that player the ball. So it's pretty easier for one of his pass catchers to outscore him. So generally, the path to Aaron Rodgers being the optimal MVP, given that he's not much of a rusher, is throwing the ball a good amount, scoring maybe multiple touchdowns through the air, and going to multiple different pass catchers. So generally, I'd prefer to have multiple, but since I'm doing 150 lineups, I'm going to allow for just one. I'm going to say require at least one, and then I'm just going to give boost to these pass catchers to make it more likely that I get to multiple. So if I see, multiple pass catchers in 80% of my lineups, 90% of my lineups that I have Aaron Rodgers in the MVP, but then I have, 10, 20 that have Aaron Rodgers with just one pass catcher, I think I'm okay with that. The 150 set. And these running backs, I'm going to give a smaller boost than the receivers. All right, I think that looks good. That's a good starting place. I can adjust if my lineups don't look the way I want them to as far as correlation goes. Then I'll make a Tannehill MVP group. Same thing, going to find Tannehill in the MVP spot, make him my key player. Go up and add all of his pass catchers to the secondary group. And I'm not going to include Derrick Henry. He has just not been involved enough in the passing game. He's had 20 targets so far this year, just not quite enough for me. And he also projects among the best on the slate, so I'm going to get some of him in these lineups anyway. I just don't feel the need to give him any kind of boost. All right, so for Ryan Tannehill, he's a little bit different than Aaron Rodgers in that he has shown some rushing upside. Not really this year, but each of the past 2 years, he had rushed for around 270 yards and 7 touchdowns. So he has shown in the past couple of years some rushing upside. With that said, I think I'm going to set the rules the same way for Ryan Tannehill. He's not, Lamar Jackson out there. He's not somebody who's going to probably rush for 100 yards in a game. So I think I'm still going to require at least one pass catcher. You could potentially, in a 150 set, consider clicking this only apply plus minus adjustments button and just have some lineups that have Ryan Tannehill with no pass catchers. I don't think I'm going to go that far. I think I am going to require at least one pass catcher and still approach it the same way for the MVP spot as Aaron Rodgers, where I'm just giving boost to these pass catchers. For the running back for Dontrell Hilliard, maybe a smaller boost there. Okay. I'm going to make another group, Rodgers in the flex. On FanDuel, you could consider making some lineups that have Aaron Rodgers in the flex with no pass catchers. Could get there. It's a little bit more likely than DraftKings because it's not full PPR. I still prefer to have at least one pass catcher, I think, when I have Aaron Rodgers in the flex. So I think I'm going to require one. If you're in a smaller field GPP, I think I might not. I might just allow for it to be Aaron Rodgers in the flex with no pass catchers. But for the largest field GPP, I think you're trying to be optimal. And I think the optimal is probably going to have, if Aaron Rodgers is in the optimal in the flex, he's probably going to have at least one pass catcher with him. Going to include the running backs here, I think. Again, and now because we have Rodgers in the flex spot, we can include the Packers pass catchers in the MVP as well. And we don't really need to get too far in the weeds on FanDuel because we have no salary multiplier. So generally, you just need to do in the captain spot the players who project pretty well. Probably didn't need to get down to the Samori Toure and Sammy Watkins, but whatever. All right. So for this group, I think I'm just going to leave it just like this. I'm just going to say if you have Rodgers in the flex spot, require at least one pass catcher, no boost or anything. One pass catcher to pair him with if he's in the flex is totally fine. But I think I am going to require one. So I think this is good enough for this Rodgers flex group. And then I'm going to create a Tannehill flex group. Same thing. I'm going to find Ryan Tannehill in the flex. Make him my key player. Actually, did I do that right for Rodgers? Let me just double check this. I did. Okay, good. All right. Tannehill in the flex is my key player. Adding all of these Titans to a secondary group. Not including Derrick Henry. All right, I think that's good enough. Now, unlike the Rodgers flex group, Tannehill, I think, is a little bit more viable in the flex spot without any pass catchers. So for Tannehill, I actually am going to click only apply plus minus adjustments. I'm not going to require a pass catcher in there when I have Ryan Tannehill in the flex. I'm just going to give little boosts to all of his pass catchers to make it more likely that in general, if I have Ryan Tannehill in the flex, I'd prefer to have at least one pass catcher. So I'm making it more likely without requiring it. And that'll do it for the groups. Save this. And I'll crunch out 50 lineups using my projections. All right, now just looking at these lineups that come up, I want to see, do they correlate the way I want them to? And this first one, Aaron Rodgers with a couple of pass catchers, no Ryan Tannehill to worry about. Aaron Rodgers in the MVP spot with multiple pass catchers looks good. Tannehill with just one pass catcher. Again, I think he has enough rushing upside that I'm okay with it. He could rush for 40 yards and a touchdown, wouldn't be a shock. All right, Tannehill here with a pass catcher. So the boost maybe worked there. Rodgers with a pass catcher plus Aaron Jones. Tannehill with Burks looks good. Rodgers with Jones and Tunyon. Tannehill with Woods. Rodgers with Tunyon and Jones. Tannehill with Burks. In general, this is turning out pretty well. I think that in general, I'm getting the correlations that I want here. The lineups that have Tannehill in the flex typically are having at least one pass catcher with him. In the MVP, we're seeing multiple. Same thing with Rodgers. Typically, I'm seeing now. Here's one: Rodgers in the MVP spot with just Aaron Jones in the flex. It's a little bit iffy. I think it could work out. That wouldn't be the biggest shock in the world if Aaron Jones scores a couple touchdowns through the air. So Aaron Rodgers throws a couple touchdowns to Aaron Jones, and maybe Aaron Rodgers, picks up enough yardage elsewhere that he gets there. So I think that this is at least a viable. It's borderline though, to be honest. This Aaron Rodgers in the MVP with just one pass catcher, particularly with that pass catcher being Aaron Jones. But I think that there are paths to this being to this working out. So I'm going to allow for this lineup. Guys, we have a great offer for new users only. You can get full access to everything Stokastic has to offer for NFL for 3 days free. Projections, ownership, 1v1 tools, lineup generator, top stacks tool, all free. Zero risk. Sign up now. The link is in the description of this video. Note that Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on and is not included in this offer. Rodgers MVP lineups. How many of those am I getting with just one pass catcher? Because I don't want to see a ton. So here I get 2, here I get 2, here just 1, here 2. All right, most of these I am seeing multiple. Here's another one with just 1 plus the defense. Allen Lazard plus Aaron Jones, if you include him. Tunyon, Cobb, Jones. Tunyon, Lazard, Jones. Tunyon, Jones. Just 1 here. So maybe getting to more than I'd like, I think, of just 1 pass catcher. Maybe it's, here's another one. So then maybe if I want fewer of those, I'd go back into advanced options, Aaron Rodgers MVP group, and give bigger boost to some of these pass catchers. So maybe go from 12 to 15%. For the pass catchers, I'm going to leave the running backs because I was already getting to a ton of Rodgers with Aaron Jones. And then recrunch, see if these look a little bit better. See right away, Rodgers MVP, multiple pass catchers. That's what I like to see in general. Take a look at those lineups. Rodgers MVP, multiple pass catchers, multiple pass catchers, multiple if you include Jones, multiple. All right, good. So now I'm seeing, I typically would prefer, if I have Rodgers in the MVP spot, multiple pass catchers from the Packers. So these look more like the lineups that I'd like to see. That little boost worked. Now I see right here, I've got Tannehill in the flex with no pass catchers. I allowed it intentionally. I don't want to see it in too many of my lineups. So I'm going to look at those lineups that have Tannehill in the flex. And you can see right away, Tannehill with a pass catcher, pass catcher, pass catcher, pass catcher, pass catcher, pass catcher. Good. All right. So for the most part, I'm seeing pass catchers in the majority of them. I did still intentionally allow for lineups with Tannehill with no pass catchers. Here we've got Tannehill with just Derrick Henry. Could work. It's not the craziest thing. Tannehill with no pass catchers. Again, I allowed it intentionally. But for the most part, as I'm scrolling through here, I'm seeing Tannehill with pass catchers in most of these lineups. Still seeing a few of these. So here's Tannehill with just Derrick Henry, Tannehill by himself. It's borderline. I might go back. Yeah, here's another one. So maybe I'd go back again to this advanced options groups. Tannehill in the flex. I gave in 8% boost. Maybe I want to go through and do 10% boost on each of these guys. And this is just kind of my process. There's nothing magical about it. I'm just going through, looking at the lineups, looking at the correlations. Do these make sense to me? And adjusting bit by bit until the correlations do look like they make sense to me, like I think they could work out. Leave it at that. And then same thing. And I do this again over and over. Sometimes dozens of times. Other times it's, 4 or 5 different slates, works out differently. But once again, I'll look at my Tannehill in the flex. Seeing him with pass catchers in most of these. Here's one with no pass catchers. Here's one with no pass catchers. So didn't eliminate them. Here's another one. Again, if you were making 40 or fewer lineups, maybe I'd probably just go in and say, uncheck that box, the plus minus box, and just say, force it at least one pass catcher with Tannehill in the flex. That's an easy way to eliminate these lineups if you don't want them. I don't mind seeing some of them with Tannehill with none of his pass catchers, but I don't want to see 40 of them. I think in my 150 set, it's not likely enough that I want to see a ton of them. But in general, I think that I'm getting to about the number I want. Um, and then the only other thing I do, so I've showed you, I look through the lineups, make sure I get them correlated well. The only other thing I do is I go through position by position and I check the exposures. Am I getting to exposures that are like, I think 37% Rodgers, 35% Tannehill seems reasonable. Running back, I'll sort by salary here. 41% Derrick Henry seems good. 24% Aaron Jones seems fine. AJ Dillon, maybe I'd go through, maybe I want more than 5% AJ Dillon. I would just go in here and, just adjust his projection slightly. Or if you're newer to Fantasy Sprinter, maybe give a thumbs up or thumbs down. I'm not going to go through my whole process here. I'm going to be digging into it a little bit more tomorrow. I'll be publishing an article about how I'm going to approach the slate from a player perspective for the largest field. DraftKings GPP, a lot of the same knowledge, though, applies to FanDuel. I'll also be on live before lock tomorrow night to talk about my thoughts on various players on both FanDuel and DraftKings. But this is just my general approach. I'm going through position by position. Stands out to me that Nick Westbrook were projected for 7.3% ownership. I think I'd like to get on top of that number. He's clearly too expensive for his level of involvement. That explains the 7.3%. But on FanDuel in particular, where touchdowns are more important, I think that he's probably got a good enough chance of scoring a touchdown that I'd probably want to be on top of that number. So I'd just go in here and say, maybe I want to boost up that projection a good amount to try and get above that 7% number. Christian Watson, 18%. He might be the wide receiver one at this point. We just saw him score 3 touchdowns. Maybe I'd want to give him a little bit of a boost. Samari Toure, Sammy Watkins, these guys are not currently my player pool. I can see that they're projected for fewer than 3 fantasy points. So give them a boost to at least 3 fantasy points. Same with Cody Hollister. Again, I'm not going to go through this whole process right now. I'm just kind of trying to show you what I look at. Are these players, do I want them to be in my player pool? Okonkwo, do I want him to be in my player pool? He's projected for just 2 fantasy points. Maybe I give him a little boost. Projected for 3.4% ownership. That's kind of interesting. Austin Hooper, 8% ownership. That's kind of interesting. Maybe I'd give him a little bit of a boost. Guerra, maybe I want him in the player pool. Jeff Swain. But again, I'm not gonna go through it all right now. Just trying to show you my general thought process. Maybe I'd give boosts here because I'm not getting to any of the Titans defense. I don't know if I'm going to want any. Packers defense getting 10%. Maybe I want a little bit more. Anyway, I'm not going to go through it all right now. Just showing you my general process, which is just looking at the lineups. Do they correlate well enough? If they don't, I go back into my groups and I adjust as necessary until they correlate in the way that I want them to. And then the only other thing I do is I go through position by position, looking at exposures, adjusting slightly until I get to the exposures that I like on each player. That's my whole process. Anyway, I hope you can find some success using this or a similar process for the Thursday Night Football slate. Good luck.